The massive working dog froze at the edge of the cemetery, muscles locked, hackles rising as if he sensed something no human could see, his dark eyes fixed on the shadows between the headstones where the wind suddenly died and the air turned heavy. Beneath the gray sky, a battle-hardened Navy SEAL knelt at a small grave, shoulders shaking, unaware that his dog was silently positioning itself between him and the darkness beyond. The leash trembled as the dog growled low, protective, urgent, as though guarding a secret buried deeper than the soil. What did the dog see that no one else could? Before the grave, before the silence and the weight of loss, there had been a quieter life stitched together by routine, discipline, and a bond forged in places where fear thrived, a life shared between a retired Navy SEAL named Marcus Hale and the military working dog who never left his side, a broad-chested sable Belgian Malinois named Ranger whose scars were earned in dust and darkness overseas and whose loyalty had outlasted war itself. Marcus lived on the outskirts of a small coastal town where fog rolled in like memory and the days followed a predictable rhythm of early runs, long hikes through pine trails, and evenings spent sitting on the porch as Ranger rested his head against Marcus's knee, always watching, always listening as if the world still required guarding. Ranger had been trained to detect danger before it happened, to read shifts in air and intention, but at home he was quieter, deeply attuned to Marcus's moods, especially after the accident that had torn Marcus's life in two and left him hollowed by grief. His daughter had been declared dead after a violent incident shrouded in unanswered questions, her small coffin sealed and lowered into the earth while Marcus stood numb, Ranger pressed against his leg as if trying to anchor him to the ground. Since that day, something in Ranger had changed, a restless edge creeping into his behavior, a constant scanning of empty spaces, sudden pauses during walks where he would freeze and stare into nothing, ears twitching as though catching sounds that never reached Marcus. Their daily routines continued, but the air between them felt heavier, charged with something unsaid, and sometimes at night Ranger would rise from his bed and pace the house, stopping at the front door or the windows, nose pressed close, breathing slow and deliberate, guarding against something unseen. Marcus noticed these changes but dismissed them as echoes of their shared past, assuming the dog was mirroring his own unease, his own inability to accept the finality of loss. Yet there were moments that unsettled him, like the morning Ranger refused to leave the cemetery path during a routine visit, standing rigid at the boundary as if blocked by an invisible wall, or the way he would occasionally whine softly when passing the edge of the woods near the old service road that led nowhere and everywhere at once. The town itself seemed to carry secrets, whispers exchanged in lowered voices, glances that lingered too long when Marcus passed with Ranger at his heel, and more than once he felt the strange sensation of being watched, a feeling Ranger seemed to confirm by subtly adjusting his position, always placing himself between Marcus and the unknown. As the days went on, Ranger's protectiveness intensified, his body language sharper, more urgent, his eyes tracking movement in shadows that should have been empty, and though Marcus tried to hold on to the comfort of their bond, the peaceful life he clung to began to fracture under the weight of unanswered questions and the dog's increasingly insistent warnings, as if Ranger knew that the past was not finished with them yet, that something buried was stirring, waiting for the right moment to surface. From the moment Ranger's behavior shifted from quiet vigilance to something sharper and more urgent, the world around Marcus began to feel subtly hostile, as if the landscape itself were rearranging to conceal threats just beyond human perception, and every day brought new signs that something was wrong, starting with the way Ranger would abruptly halt mid-stride during their morning runs, paws braced against the pavement, nose lifting as his chest expanded with slow, deliberate breaths that pulled invisible information from the air, his eyes locking onto empty intersections, abandoned lots and tree lines that should have been harmless. Marcus tried to maintain structure, believing discipline was the only thing keeping his grief from consuming him, yet Ranger increasingly disrupted those routines, forcing pauses, rerouting walks, guiding Marcus away from certain paths with a physical insistence that could not be ignored, and though Marcus never heard footsteps or saw movement, a pressure would settle in his chest every time Ranger did this, a sensation like being narrowly missed by something unseen. At night, the dog's restlessness intensified, his ears snapping upright at the faintest disturbances, his body positioning itself between Marcus and the doors, the windows, the darkness beyond the walls, and there were nights when Marcus woke to find Ranger standing perfectly still at the foot of the bed, staring into the hallway as if tracking movement that flowed just out of sight. The town itself offered no comfort, its streets too quiet, its residents too careful with their words, and more than once Marcus noticed unfamiliar vehicles idling at odd hours near his property, always gone when he looked again, always returning just often enough to stir unease, while Ranger responded with low vibrations in his chest, Not full growls but warnings, signals honed in combat zones where survival depended on recognizing danger before it announced itself. As days blurred together, Ranger began leading Marcus toward places tied to the past, pulling toward the cemetery even when Marcus tried to avoid it, refusing to cross certain thresholds while obsessively circling others, his nose tracing patterns in the grass near the graves, near the trees, near the old service road where the forest grew thick and light struggled to penetrate, and each time Marcus followed, the dog's tension spiked, his muscles coiled, his breathing controlled as if preparing for engagement. The cemetery visits grew heavier, the air colder, and Ranger's reactions more extreme, planting himself between Marcus and the headstones, scanning the tree line with predatory focus, his body subtly blocking Marcus's line of sight as though shielding him from something painful or dangerous. And once, just once, Marcus thought he saw movement among the stones, a flicker of shadow retreating behind marble, but when he blinked it was gone, leaving only Ranger's intense stare and the unsettling certainty that they were not alone. Storm clouds began rolling in more frequently, thickening the sky and dimming the world, and during one such storm Ranger reacted with unprecedented urgency, dragging Marcus away from the service road moments before a tree crashed down where they would have been standing, the timing too precise to dismiss as coincidence, reinforcing the growing realization that Ranger was responding to more than instinct, that he was tracking a pattern, following clues woven through scent, sound, and memory. The sense of being watched escalated into certainty when Marcus discovered disturbed earth near the edge of his property, boot prints partially erased by rain, the faint smell of unfamiliar humans lingering just long enough for Ranger to react with a sudden surge of aggression, teeth bared toward the woods, his stance unmistakably defensive, and though no intruders appeared, the message was clear, someone had been there, someone had crossed into their space. As the nights grew darker and the town quieter, Ranger's vigilance became relentless, his eyes constantly scanning, his body always angled outward, absorbing threats before they reached Marcus, and with every passing day the dog seemed to grow more desperate, more insistent, pulling Marcus toward the cemetery again and again, toward the shadows he refused to ignore, and on one heavy, fog-laden evening, Ranger froze at the cemetery gate just as he had before, every muscle locked, every sense engaged, his gaze fixed not on the grave but on the tree line beyond it, where the fog thickened unnaturally and the silence pressed in, and for the first time Marcus felt it too, the unmistakable presence of someone watching from the shadows, waiting as Ranger stepped forward, placing himself between Marcus and the darkness, signaling that whatever was coming was closer than ever. The night descended like a shroud over the cemetery, fog curling around the headstones, muffling sound and distorting the familiar paths, and Ranger's body vibrated with tense energy, muscles coiled, ears twitching toward every whisper of movement as if the shadows themselves were alive. Marcus felt his heartbeat spike as the wind shifted, carrying a scent that froze him in place, the unmistakable trace of human presence, fragile and fleeting yet undeniable, and before he could react, a figure emerged from the fog, small, hesitant, trembling, and in that instant Ranger lunged forward, teeth bared, a wall of fur and fury between Marcus and the unknown, growling, snapping, forcing the intruder back, while Marcus stumbled through the mist, eyes straining to make sense of the scene, heart hammering, and then he saw her. His daughter, alive, wide-eyed, hidden moments ago in the shadows, tears streaking her dirt-smudged face, silent and trembling, and the shock nearly knocked him to his knees as the reality collided with years of grief and memory, Ranger never breaking his protective stance, growling and nudging Marcus backward, insisting he remain shielded while the girl took tentative steps forward, the fog swirling around them, blurring the lines between nightmare and miracle, danger and salvation. And then the shadows shifted again, the real threat appearing as masked figures emerging from the tree line, intent clear, movement lethal, and Ranger exploded into action, body a blur, intercepting, dodging, tackling, his teeth snapping, paws striking, every ounce of training and instinct unleashed to protect both his human and the child he had guarded with unwavering loyalty. Marcus swept his daughter into his arms, ducking and rolling as Ranger fought, the air filled with the sounds of struggle, grunts, growls, the thud of bodies hitting the earth, and as the first streaks of dawn began to bleed through the mist, the masked attackers retreated, broken, scared, outmatched, leaving Marcus panting, trembling, clutching his living daughter while Ranger stood alert, side by side with him, chest heaving, ears still scanning the fog, eyes glinting with unshed relief and lingering wariness, and in the quiet aftermath, Marcus finally dropped to his knees, the weight of years of grief dissolving into disbelief and awe, tears pouring freely as Ranger nuzzled his shoulder, unyielding and vigilant, and in that moment, Marcus realized the truth his dog had known all along. Loyalty does not falter, hope does not die, and sometimes the greatest miracles arrive cloaked in shadows. But one unbreakable protector can change the course of everything. The first light of day broke over the cemetery, spilling pale gold across damp earth and headstones still glistening from the night's fog, and Marcus remained on his knees for long moments, clutching his daughter to his chest, feeling the rapid, shuddering heartbeat of a child returned from a world he had mourned for years, while Ranger stayed unmovable beside them, ears upright, gaze sweeping every shadow, a silent sentinel who refused to relax until every threat had vanished. The realization that she was alive, that she had somehow survived, surged through Marcus with a mixture of disbelief, relief, and overwhelming gratitude, tears streaking his face as he inhaled her scent, her warmth pressed against him, and slowly, shaking, she wrapped her arms around him, burying her face into his chest, clinging to the father she thought she had lost, as Ranger nudged gently against her side, sniffing, licking. His presence a grounding force, communicating a quiet, unwavering reassurance that safety had been earned but vigilance would remain. Emergency crews and law enforcement arrived in the aftermath, sweeping through the cemetery and surrounding woods, their presence both comforting and surreal, marking the transition from nightmare to recovery. And while Marcus answered their questions, recounted the encounter, and filed reports, he remained acutely aware of Ranger's attention, how every movement, every sound still drew the dog's focus. A reminder that loyalty was not passive but active, a living, breathing commitment that had carried them through the darkest night, while his daughter clung to him, alternating between exhaustion and elation, still processing the impossible. And as they finally left the cemetery behind, Ranger walking at Marcus's side with a deliberate, protective pace, the bond between human and dog felt indestructible, forged not only through past missions and training but now through shared trauma, heroism, and the restoration of a family torn apart. The following days were filled with cautious celebration, medical checks, and quiet moments of reflection, each one underscoring the fragile beauty of life reclaimed, and Marcus found himself attuned more than ever to the subtleties of Ranger's behavior, reading the slight shifts in posture, the tiniest flick of an ear, the low rumble in the dog's chest, understanding that the connection between them had deepened beyond words, beyond memory, into something primal and unbreakable. He watched his daughter laugh again, saw her explore the edges of the yard with Ranger bounding at her heels, protective but gentle, his every instinct tuned to their well-being, and in those small, intimate moments, the shared glance, the brush of fur against skin, the mutual acknowledgement of survival and trust, Marcus felt the immense weight of gratitude, the enormity of having been given a second chance, and the lessons that came with it. Nights remained quieter now but still charged with awareness, the past etched into the edges of their lives, and Marcus made a point to walk the property with Ranger each evening, allowing the dog to patrol, sniff, and guard, while his daughter followed, sometimes running ahead, sometimes pausing to pet the dog, the three of them forming a circle of safety, love, and vigilance that had been hard-won and would never be broken. Time began to soften the edges of terror, but the memory of the night lingered, etched into muscle memory and emotional resonance, a reminder of how close loss had come, and Marcus allowed himself to feel every emotion without restraint, grief, relief, pride, awe, and above all, profound appreciation for the creature who had never faltered, who had read the unseen, protected without hesitation, and reminded him in every motion that courage was measured not in the absence of fear but in the willingness to stand between danger and those you love. Together, they returned to routines that now carried new significance. Morning hikes became rituals of celebration rather than mere exercise, training sessions in the yard became games of trust and skill, and quiet evenings on the porch transformed into sacred ceremonies of presence and gratitude, each one reinforcing the bond that had saved their lives. And through it all, Marcus noticed subtle changes in his daughter too. Her laughter more open, her trust more expansive, her attachment to Ranger unwavering, as though she instinctively understood the depth of the loyalty that had kept her alive. The story of that night, of Ranger's heroism and her miraculous survival, spread slowly through the town, whispered first in awe, then in admiration, drawing neighbors, friends, and strangers into a narrative of courage, vigilance, and unyielding love. Yet Marcus never allowed the heroism to overshadow the quiet, profound reality of their bond, the day-to-day courage of living, trusting, and healing together. Ranger never demanded recognition, never sought praise, but Marcus found himself kneeling beside him each evening, stroking his fur, murmuring words of gratitude that the dog seemed to understand as deeply as any human could, a recognition that their connection transcended language, and that every scar, every sleepless night, every moment of danger, had led to this unshakable unity. Weeks turned into months, and with every sunrise, Marcus noticed the resilience that had taken root not only in his daughter but in himself, tempered by the knowledge that the past could be honored without being allowed to dominate the present, and that true courage came in forms both monumental and subtle, from Ranger's explosive defense against attackers to the quiet presence that steadied him during sleepless nights, from the way his daughter's hand fit perfectly into his as they walked, through the misted mornings to the way Ranger rested his head against her knee, a guardian and friend. Eventually, the Hale family returned to the life they had known, but forever changed. Walks carried purpose, silence carried meaning, and every shadow was met with a confidence born of shared survival, while Ranger remained at the center of their lives, a constant reminder that heroism is not only action but devotion, that love is as much about presence and protection as it is about joy, and that sometimes the strongest bonds are those forged in the crucible of danger and despair. And in the end, as Marcus watched his daughter play under the fading light with Ranger running alongside her, heart full, eyes scanning the horizon as always, he understood a truth deeper than any mission brief, any training, any memory of combat. The greatest courage is not measured in battles fought alone, but in loyalty kept, love defended, and the quiet, unwavering presence of a friend who will never let you face the darkness unprotected, a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. Etched into muscle, memory, and heart, an eternal testament to the bond between human and dog, and to the miraculous return of what had been lost but never forgotten.